we were just in the US on a short speaking tour, and we went to Oklahoma to hear Jordan Peterson wrestling with
Okay.
God, your buddy Jordan, and we did a little deep dive afterwards about it, and we're big fans. We followed him as well for a long time, and he's clearly a really intelligent man, and he does a lot of good work, and it's great to see him wrestling. But we had a little bit of a frustration, I must say, which we talked about in our post talk
Hmm.
analysis. And it's interesting because we watched him with. It's great to see him in a jacket with images of the Blessed Virgin Mary as well.
Yeah, he's causing quite a bit of a scandal in my circles with that jacket.
I'm
Everybody's
not
like, "Why don't
surprised.
you tell him this is over the top? It's scandalous."
So he was speaking, and he was kind of hand wringing a little bit, and as he does as we watch him wrestle. And what I found interesting is when we've seen him speaking, he talked recently with um, Father Mike Schmitz and Bishop Barron, who I know you also know and have dialogued with. When I was watching that, especially as a Catholic, he's our Catholic bishop, that it was like Jordan spoke, and he was brilliant and he was interesting. And then Bishop Barron came in, and it was just this clarity. He just spoke with this clarity that felt to me like a breath of fresh air, with all the torturous hand wringing that our dear Jordan does. And I think for me, it said something like, the truth will set you free. There was kind of that sense of it. And Jordan spoke in his tour about truth and said, that's the answer. The answer is truth. But we felt in our analysis, it's like, but what is that? What is that truth? And of course, for us, it's the face of Christ himself.
Yeah. Well, as you might not know, but I'm going to be on the tour too. Like in a few weeks, I'm going to do, I think, 6, 7, 7 or 8 events with Jordan. On the Wrestling with God tour, and I in some ways I think that there are different functions that we play, and we had Bishop Barron. We did a commentary on the Gospel for Daily Wire a few weeks ago. It was like I guess now it's more than a month ago. And so he was there, Bishop Barron, Jordan Peterson was there, Bishop Barron, and a few other people that were there when we did the Exodus seminar. And, like you said, Bishop Barron, in some ways, he clearly understands the tradition. He speaks with words that are, for most Christians, are theologically, precise and clear. But I would say that for a lot of people, the problem is that many of those words don't mean anything anymore. And so they do mean something. And I think if anybody is able to give them life again, it's Bishop Barron. But for many secular people, those words, when you use words like spirit, all these words, what are you talking about? You talk about the Trinity, you talk about, and so what Jordan offers is in some ways an image of the struggle people have to make sense of the words, and also the detours that he takes are often there to explicate words that used to be obvious for most people, but now have become just shortcuts. And the problem too is that sometimes those shortcuts are true for Christians as well. You think it sounds clear because you're hearing words that you've heard many times. Just because you know the words doesn't mean that you understand, the what's going on. And so I think Jordan offers a great service, but like you said, in the end, Jordan, at least I would still say he's probably not really a Christian. He's kind of in the narthex, he's in the vestibule, he's standing there at the door, but he hasn't been baptized, he hasn't kind of moved into the church. And so but then he plays that role. So
yeah, exactly. And I think that's what we concluded, isn't it, Mark? We said, because we were with Gavin, our colleague at the time, and he said, yes, but St. Paul says, and we said, yeah, but this is not your tour, Gavin, it's Jordan's tour, and this is where he's coming from.
Well, and it's like he's building exactly as Jonathan's just said, he's building a metaphysical reality for people who've got no ground in that sort of language. And I think he does it really, really well. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, and he's trying to show, because a lot of those images, because many of the images, especially in the Old Testament, I don't know what you talked about, but especially a lot of the images in the Old Testament, we've lost mythological language. And so we don't know what these stories are about. We just see them as things people have to believe in. And Jordan is able to really show the coherence of the narratives and the stories, and how, you can explain them from the psychological point of view, even though they're not limited to that. And he often says, like, I can't speak for the metaphysical aspect of it, but I know that from a psychological point of view, these images and stories are extremely coherent and really do represent how people exist in the world, how they think, how and what they want. It really manifests that in ways that you just can continue to unpack. So,
and there's a real crossover with your work there, isn't there? Because really, what he's doing is answering those questions. Is this story true? And from a modern perspective, we've got a very different idea of what truth is, which is, it seems to be, if you're reading a book, it needs to be a direct account of everything that was said and done. And if it's not a direct recording of everything, then it's fiction. And fiction there's this idea that it has no value, that it's made up, and that there's no real truth at the bottom of it. And that's just completely false, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a misunderstanding, first of all, of how it is that people remember things, how people tell stories, why they tell stories, why they recount the things that they remember. And, the scripture takes all of that into account. And so the manner in which the stories in scripture are told don't alien, because one of the problems with this kind of forensic idea of reality is that it alienates us from ourselves. It pretends like we don't exist, and that the world is just this objective series of facts that you just have to collate together, and there you go, that's the truth. But that's just not how it works. I don't know what to tell you. That's not how reality functions. We collate facts together towards purposes, and and that's how scripture does it, and it does it in ways that sometimes are uncomfortable for us as modern people, but that's because they're more true, they're more compressed. They bring the things together. So I always say Genesis 1 is the best description of how the world exists and how the world functions and how the world originates. It just happens to not be a scientific description, and better for that case. It's science is downstream from what Genesis talks about. Science is lower on the level of how reality functions than what Genesis 1 is actually describing.
So would you say Genesis is about why rather than how? Would that be a good summary?
Well, it's can I say it's a how related to the why. That is, it shows you how things exist based on their purpose and based on the manner in which they come into being, in some ways, into consciousness, like into perception of good and evaluation of goodness. And so for the animals that are described in scripture, they're described related to man. And so it says, it's basically like God created wild animals and tame animals. It's like, that's not a biological description, folks. That's a description of how we as humans encounter the world of animals, which is, there are animals that are there for our service, like sheep and goats and, all these animals. And there are animals that, there are animals that you eat, and there are animals that can eat you. And that's a very different category, but it's a real category of meaning that precedes the kind of biological taxonomy that we have. Because if a lion is eating you, you won't care about its taxonomy. Like the reality of eating and being eaten, for example, is far more immediate to your existence than the scientific descriptions. Although I don't deny the scientific descriptions, but they're downstream from this type of description.